Welcome aboard to today's class. Today we are going to discuss bias. How do you get it? Where do we see it featured in the Torah? And what can you do about it? Let's get straight involved. You have the source sheets hopefully available to you. And here we go. Today's lesson is going to dwell on a fascinating story that appears in this week's Torah portion. And the Rebbe is going to use this as a lesson for the concept of, in Hebrew, Aseh Lecha Rav, which is the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, tells us that you need to have for yourself a mentor. You need to have someone who you can rely on for direction and instruction. So some people might assume that Jewish people just do what they're told. And in this sikha, in this conversation, we will see how there is more of a nuanced approach and why a person needs their mentor, why you need to have your own personally guided journey. Everyone, of course, has their own internal biases. And what we need to do is when we are faced with important life decisions, we often are tempted to go in the direction that is not truly in our best interest, but it's something that, in the deepest place in our heart that, I prefer it. But therefore, the best thing you can do is to have someone with whom you consult, check it over with that person, and then someone who's wiser and a greater character than you, and they can help you reach a better and a good decision that is better suited for you. And we will seek that. We will find this from Moshe, from Moses. Now, this sikha is actually said not, this speech which we're discussing from the Rebbe was not said at a Shabbos farbrengen, at a regular weekday speech focused on our parsha of Pinchas. Rather, this speech was said during the 9-day holiday of Sukkot. Now, you're wondering why the need for an introduction like this. Well, it's always nice to know the context and the background and the occasion of the sikha. More than that, every day of Sukkot is associated with another guest. The Kabbalistic term for guest is ushpizin. Ushpizin is the Aramaic or Zoharic word for a guest, and every night of Sukkot, there visits another guest, another ancestor, another forebearer of Judaism and its traditions. One of the nights is going to be Moses. Moshe Rabbeinu is presented on one of those nights, and it is on one of those nights that we're discussing Moshe Rabbeinu that this sikha is said. And we're looking at Moshe Rabbeinu, and we're looking for a message in the conversation of having a personal mentor. Now, why the need for a personal mentor? So the Rebbe actually led a campaign and called it a personal request that each individual person appoint a personal mentor. That would be the benefit for that, of course, we will come through at the end of today's conversation. So let's take a look. As we discovered last week, we've already jumped 40 years. So in the traveling in the desert, the Jews went from year 1 or 2, they went 38 years later to year 40, and now they are right at the cusp of entering the land and at the end of the life of Moses. And I think in last week we already gave away Aaron. So we're at the end of the journey in a way. And here Moses, at the end of 120 years, at the 120 years old, 40 years of leadership, is at the highest point, and he is faced by a question that he seemingly doesn't know the answer to. Why doesn't Moses know the answer? Or perhaps why is he not competent? Why does he not want to say the answer that he knows in this situation? Let us discover. And as we always do, I'm going to ask you guys to pull out your source sheets, and we will we'll read through some of these sources. Source number 1 is from our Parsha. What's the context? The Jewish people are gathered together. Moses is sitting on the top of the dais. On one side of the dais sits Elazar, the son of Aaron, the high priest. On another side is sitting Joshua, his ultimate student. and the 78 or the 70 elders are with him there too. And so you've got all of these people, and then you have the entire Jewish population is sitting together, waiting to hear teachings from their master, Moses. And 5 people are brave enough to stand up in front of this crowd and approach and make a request. So what are we up to? We're up to the division of the land of Israel. Every tribe is going to get a piece. Each individual will then divide their piece amongst his descendants, and so it will go forever. How are the portions of the land divided? Well, given that we need given that we need the portion to remain within the family, and tribes go according to the father or the man, therefore it is vital that the portion of the lands, the inheritance, will be distributed through the fathers as well. Now, the flip side, if we were to divide the land through the woman, well, the tribes don't go through the woman, at which point, if a woman married out of her tribe into another tribe, which is okay, at that point, part of one tribe's area would then move on to another tribe. And what would end up happening is you no longer have these divisions in the land of tribes, rather you'd have like this whole conglomerate and mixture, a melting pot of different tribes, not something which we wanted in this situation. All of this said, let's take a look at what the Torah has to say, a review of this episode with Moses and the 70 elders. Take a look, and I'm going to ask Shmuel, will you please read for us the first source, which is 4 paragraphs.
A petition was presented by the daughters of Tzelafchad, son of Chefer, son of Gilad, son of Machir, son of Menashe, of the family of Menashe, Joseph's son. Their names were Maklah, Noah, Chaglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the elders, and the entire community at the tabernacle entrance and said, "Our father died in the desert. He was not among Korach's party who protested against God. He died because of his own sin and left no sons. Why should our father's name be lost in his family because he did not have a son? Give us a portion of land along with our father's brothers."
Thank you. And so as said, this is a family that the only people left in the family are women. And so now Moses is faced by a question that he doesn't necessarily have the answer to. I'd like you guys to pay attention to the request. In the 3rd paragraph, the request is, our father died in the desert. He was not among Korach's party. He died because of his own sin and he left no sons. Tangentially, who do you think this man was? If you recall, there was once an episode of someone who was collecting sticks in the desert, and they busted him, and he was the first ever capital punishment in Jewish history. This is the father of, this is Mr. Tzelafchad, the father of these 5 girls, to the best of my memory. So here we are. They're a family of girls, and they wouldn't receive the portion designated for their father, and as such, their father's name would be erased. They're asking for, considering the circumstances, they want to be able to receive their father's portion. So now you can understand the impact of this question, of this request. If Moses says yes, if Moses gives them for what they're asking, then this can undo or overturn the entire system that's already been established with regard to nachlaot, with regard to inheritances. And it even can change the entire societal norm of that era. So now everyone's waiting for Moses. What do you think Moses does? Well, Moses could have easily said, hey, this is the answer. But instead, Moses surprises the people and he says, it's a great question. I don't have the answer. Let me consult with God. Everybody's waiting. Moshe presents the case to God, and soon he comes back with an answer. the women are right. In the case of a family of only girls, the daughters would inherit their father's land. Tzelafchad's daughters left happily, and everybody else is impressed by their courage. Let's see in source 2, which is the continuation, let's see this conversation of Moses with God and then back to the daughters. And we'll ask Carla, can you please pick up source 2 for us, which is about 7 paragraphs.
Yes, except when I turned my microphone off, it vanished. There it is. Moses brought their case before God. God spoke to Moses, saying, the daughters of Tzelafchad have a just claim. Give them a hereditary portion of land alongside their father's brothers. Let their father's inheritance thus pass over to them. Speak to the Israelites and tell them that if a man dies without a son, his inheritance shall go to his daughter. If he has no daughter, his inheritance shall go to his brothers. If he has no brothers, his inheritance should go to his father's brothers. If his father had no brothers, his inheritance should go to the closest relative in his family, who shall then be his heir. This was the decreed law for the Israelites, as God had commanded Moses.
Thank you, Carla. So what do we have? We have the rest of the episode, and as such, Moses lays down the law of how the rest of the inheritances will always be divided. If there is no son, it goes through to the daughters. If there are no daughters, you go back up a generation, slide it over one to a brother, and see if there are sons there, as long as you can keep it within the family. And it continues like that. And by the way, when you'll get a chance to review the laws of inheritances in the Rambam, you will discover in the Maimonides' first ever codification of Jewish law, he goes through every possible circumstance and situation of when there might be, of what there might be in inheritances. It is fascinating. I will just drop a by the way comment, and that is that nowadays, regarding the inheritances, the most important thing is that every member of the family get something. And so what you discover often is that people like to sign off in their will. They like to sign off a portion of their belongings to a charity of their choice. And it is nevertheless still important that a parent leave something for each of their children. In addition to that, there is still another detail, which is that we're encouraged that when you make your will, you make sure to include not just your sons, but also your daughters. So if you haven't included your daughters in your will, it's time to go back to the lawyer. Okay. Now we're going to move on to source 3, and over here we are going to find the focal point of our conversation today. And this source is from Nachmanides. Who is Nachmanides? Nachmanides is a grandson of the Rambam. Now, Nachmanides has a Hebrew name, and his Hebrew name, or is an acronym, it is Ramban, Ramban, and his name was Moses, the son of Nachman. He lived between 1194 and 1270, which comes across as 76 years. It's a long time in those days. And he was a Sephardic Jewish sage in Catalonia. And he wrote a famous commentary on the Torah, which endeavors to uncover the spiritual depth of the text. And we are going to get a piece of this Ramban right here in source 3. Where is he going with this Ramban? Let's take a look. Why didn't Moses reach his own decision? Why was it necessary to bring the question before God? Did he suffer from indecisiveness or not know the answer? Let's take a look, and the answer is found hidden in the words of the woman's presentation. Juan, will you please read for us source 3?
They spoke this way because they thought that Moses hated Korah far more than all other sinners who died in the desert, since they defined him personally and fought everything he did. They so that most might say out of hate, let no one extend kindness, nor be gracious to these orphans. Let their father's sin be remembered. Therefore, they informed him that their father was not among them.
Thank you, Juan. So Nachmanides points out a very important detail, and that is that you thought that the reason Moses has to go back to God is because he didn't know the answer, or perhaps another explanation is going to be because they came to Moses saying, they came with a presentation of you don't like a certain group of people, and therefore I want to tell you that our father was not part of that group. Coming with that notion, Moses has to make a very obvious show that he is not connected to any such bias. Let's take a look how the Rebbe deals with this, and I'm going to ask Terry, do you have the thing? Can I upload? Can I send you a link? Let me send you a link. It's over here still. Ready?
Okay.
Ready, set, go.
Yeah. Okay. The Torah relates that when Tzelafchad's daughters approached Moses and requested the portion of land designated for their father, Moses didn't dwell on the question and tried to resolve it. Instead, he immediately brought the question before God. Did Moses actually lack the ability to answer them? Rather, commentators explain when the daughters of Tzelafchad revealed in their petition that their father was not one of Moses's enemies. He was not among Korach's party who protested against God. It was an act of flattery. If he would adjudicate their case, he would be guilty of accepting bribery of things. Therefore, he avoided answering their question.
Thank you, Tari. So what you've got here is this idea that Moses is being extra careful about other people's impressions on him. They came and said, our father was not involved in the story of Korach. And so Moses says, oh, you're mentioning Korach, I'm out. Just for a moment, who is Korach? So if you remember, about 2 or 3 parshas ago, which is on the calendar, it's about 39 years ago in this story, Moses is giving instruction to the people, and he is countered by someone who wants to lead a kind of a rebellion against the leadership of the Jewish community, and that fellow's name was Korach. Korach was Moses' nephew, in a way, a cousin or a nephew. And he said, why should Moses be any better than me? In fact, why shouldn't we all be leaders? And so he led a bit of a rebellion against the people, against the leadership. But here we have this idea of a bribery of things. So let's take a look at this bribery of things. We're going to discuss it in Maimonides, Mishnah Torah, the laws of Sanhedrin, 23, chapter 23, clause 3. And it says that so the Torah tells us that bribery blinds even the righteous and sharply warns against it. But we tend to think of bribery as a direct funds being transferred to a judge. Here, however, we've chosen to use the term of shoichad dvarim, bribery of things. What are these things? What's this conversation? So Maimonides explains over here, based on a comment in the Talmud, that a bribe can take on many forms, and our sages went to great lengths to avoid any vestige of self-interest when adjudicating cases. And so if you take a look at this Rambam, at this piece of the Maimonides in source 2, we go through a bunch of stories. It should probably be like source 4 or something, but we'll manage. one of the stories, he says, there was a judge who was once getting onto a small boat to cross a river. Someone extended his hand and helped him get on the boat. That person had a case to bring before the judge. But then the judge told him, I cannot serve as a judge for you. A similar episode, a person once removed a feather from a judge's scarf, and another person once covered spittle that was lying before a judge. The judges told them, I cannot serve as a judge for you. These episodes are all telling us that when they did something, when this person did something as a favor, as a personal favor in inverted commas, for the judge, he was actually trying to buy the judge's goodwill, and as such, he would be able to, he would win the case later on. Two more stories. A person once gave a priestly tithe to a judge who was a priest, so the judge is meant to get it, and the person is meant to give it, but because this person gave it to the judge knowing that he has a case with that judge, the judge said, I cannot serve as a judge for you. You've done your mitzvah, you've given me what you're meant to give. Nevertheless, because I am biased towards you, you gave me something, can't take it. And it goes a bit further. There was a sharecropper who was working on a field belonging to a judge. And so he would always bring in the crop that he had harvested. He would always bring it in on Fridays. One week he knew that he was going to have a court case adjudicated by this judge on a Friday. So he figured he'll come in early. He'll bring it in on the Thursday, and like that, the judge will be favorable to him. And to this as well, the judge said, I cannot serve as a judge for you. So this concept is based on the statement in the Torah which says that bribery blinds the eyes of the wise. In Hebrew, shochad ya'avor einei chachamim. The bribery will cover over the eyes of the righteous people, of the wise people. Bribery is not only the blatant attempt to pay someone off, but it can be doing anything just to win their bias. So in this case, in these stories, you've discovered already how hard and how strong, to what great lengths a judge would go so as to remain impartial. And we see a similar behavior coming out with Moses. Let's continue to take a look. We're going to go with section C, personal bias, and let's bring it back to Rabbi Shmuel. Take it away from the Rebbe, and please read, until the meaningless bribe.
Moses, the greatest of all Jewish leaders. Think about it. On one hand, who was greater than Moses? The Torah was transmitted through him from Sinai to all generations. Every great Torah scholar owes his scholarship and the authority that comes along with it to the fact that Moses transmitted the Torah to Joshua, who in turn transmitted it to the elders, and so on through the 40 generations of the Torah's transmission, as listed by Maimonides in his introduction to Mishnah Torah and in the generations that followed. Moreover, this episode took place in the 40th year when Moses reached his zenith, having received the entire Torah. After all, some Torah concepts were revealed after the revelation at Sinai, throughout the 40 years in the desert. But by the 40th year, he had received the entire Torah, reaching the pinnacle of his perfection. If so, he should have responded to the query of Tzzelafchad's daughters. He was also surely aware that a scholar is obligated by Jewish law to respond to questions when they come before him. It was a question posed not by one person, but by Tzzelafchad's 5 daughters, and posed in the presence of the elders and the entire community. Furthermore, it was regarding an essential matter for the Jewish people in general, and for that generation in particular, the matter of settling the land of Israel. We know of its importance from Moses' own discussion with the tribes of Gad and Reuben. If so, according to the Torah of Moses, he had the obligation and the right to answer the question on his own.
Thank you, Rabbi Shmuel. So what you discover is Moses is a great teacher. He's at his highest point. He knows it all. He's got it all worked out. And nevertheless, when it comes to this important moment where he feels like, when it comes to this moment, he feels like he needs to pass it on. He cannot lead it on his own. Let's take a look. Let's continue with the meaningless bribe. And we're going to ask Terry, will you continue for us the next, what would it be? 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs. And you have to unmute yourself. Somewhere at the bottom of your screen on the left, there should be a little microphone button. No, Terry, we can't hear you. We're going to move on. Oh, we can hear you. Off you go.
Okay, but now I got to go back to this here. Okay, let's see. Okay, so now I'm down to what second what section were we? Source to source, a personal by. Let's see. What's the name of what I'm supposed to read, Rabbi?
We need to get you the page number. Who can tell us the page number?
7.
Page 7.
7.
Well, I don't really. Oh, here 6. I see 6, and the meaningless bribe.
Yes.
Is that it?
Yes, and go across four paragraphs till the next page in the middle.
Okay. On the other hand, the bribery of things, the woman's statement that their father was not among Korach's group was inconsequential. Korach's rebellion took place 39 years earlier. Even at the time, Moses didn't feel that he needed endorsements from human beings to prove his legitimacy. He relied on God himself. He said, God will demonstrate, God will create an opening in the ground, and that indeed happened. When that occurred, even Korach and his party didn't deny his legitimacy. 39 years later, Moses's leadership was unquestionable. There was no inherent flattery in affirming his authority. Nonetheless, they made mention of the fact that their father hadn't questioned Moses' legitimacy. 39 years earlier, in the moments before the ground opened up, when it was still a reasonable assessment, adopted by Korach, his party, and 250 prominent leaders, as Rashi points out. Therefore, Moses did not want to judge their case. He did not want to be suspect of any bribery of things that could potentially tilt his decision, despite being the incontestable Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses wrote his story in the Torah, the written Torah, which means that it is a lesson for every single Jewish man and woman. It tells how careful we must be to avoid bribery, even an inconsequential form of bribery, like trivial flattery to a person of the greatness of Moses.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Terry. So what do we have? We have this conversation with Moshe Rabbeinu, and he's the leader. He is at the perfect moment. He knows all the information. Nevertheless, he won't give the instruction. Why? Because 39 years ago, someone led a rebellion against him, and here he is. Someone might think that, you know what, maybe he is still impartial to the people who were involved in that. And so therefore, Moses, 39 years later, when someone is saying something which is like, really not relevant to him, but still maybe someone else was worried about it. Therefore, Moses at that point turns around and he says, I will consult with my mentor, with Hashem. There was a judge, not a Jewish judge, but a judge, who was in his later years became deaf. And so the people said to him, in the Torah, it says that a judge who accepts a bribe will become blind or becomes blinded, but you became deaf. This is inconsistent. So the judge said back in jest, I always heard about the bribes, but I never got them. I never saw them. So therefore I was never blinded, just became deaf. So in our conversation here, right, we have this, we see how even a small flattery regarding something which took place years and years and years ago is enough to cloud the sound judgment of the leader of a generation. And so if he needed to take every precaution to avoid even the slightest hint of bias when making decisions, so then for sure we should be doing a similar thing. And more so, what is further the significance to us is that each of us need to get ourselves a mentor with whom we can consult when we need to take on important decisions. And this, as we said, is a fulfillment of the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, which says that a person should appoint for themselves a mentor. Asay l'cha rav. And as this is from a sikha, so the Rebbe explained that a person can never be fully objective about himself. We're naturally biased. When faced with life choices, we often do not judge the situation correctly, and we make decisions that are selfish and sometimes even foolish. And therefore, it's the best idea to get yourselves a mentor, a spiritual advisor, or an advisor for anything who will be able to get you objective advice when faced with a dilemma. But nevertheless, there were people who had a hard time when the Rebbe spoke about this, and the Rebbe spoke about this for a very long time, over much longer than a year. The Rebbe campaigned this thing at every public session that he had. Nevertheless, people had a difficult time accepting the proposition. They said, why should I not make my own decisions? Am I really so unwise that I can't handle my own issues? And so it's actually at this speech that the Rebbe is giving that he's responding to these queries. And the story goes that present at the speech was a guest. And soon I'll show you a video of what it looked like. But present at the speech was a guest who had come from England. He was aware that the Rebbe was speaking about appointing a personal mentor, but he himself had written to the Rebbe a personal letter saying, Rebbe, it's hard for me to find the right guy, one that's appropriate for me, and I can't take my son because that's not respectable. Like, who else could mentor me if not my son? And I can't take the Rebbe because the Rebbe is not accepting such appointments. Where can I possibly get one from? And this sikha, this speech that the Rebbe is giving, is actually a response in a way to this fellow's personal letter that he sent the Rebbe. So let's take a look at we're already on page 8 at the bottom, and I'm gonna ask Carla if you'll read for us this last piece.
If this is true of Moses, it is certainly true of ourselves. Ordinary people are wholly incomparable to the greatness of Moses. Also, our bribery and biases are not memories from 39 years ago, but matters of current import which are relevant at this very moment. It is beyond a doubt that we cannot rely on our own judgment. We must consult with someone greater than ourselves. As the Mishnah says, appoint a teacher for yourself. You can appoint a mentor to your liking, the Mishnah said. Appoint a teacher. You make the choice. But he must be greater than yourself, and you must commit to accept his judgment and to follow his advice. It could be very difficult to make this commitment. After all, nobody is smarter than yourself. Indeed, the Mishnah says appoint using the Hebrew term ashesh, thank you, which implies coercion. But you certainly have the ability to do it because God does not request that which is not within our power.
Excellent. Thank you. And so there you go. You have the strength to do it. All you need to do is find that guy, find that person in your life who will be the person, your soundboard, who you can bounce off these kind of questions. And I don't like, I was thinking earlier, what's an example of the kind of question that a person might want to take to their mentor? And I thought, well, does it include your dress code? Must you check over with your mentor how you dress? And I thought it probably doesn't, because we've already received from mentors guidance on how to dress. Like when we were 10 or younger or a bit older, we dressed ourselves and our parents said, oh no, that's, that doesn't fit, or that won't go, or whatever. And we figured it out. But now when we're adapting new habits like daily prayer or daily study, you run into this question of, well, what should I do? How much time should I put towards something brand new, something which is so demanding, something which takes effort? How much effort should I be putting there so that it remains something I want to do without losing its allure, because I'm spending so much time on it, because I'm inconveniencing myself to whatever extent that I may be. And those are the kind of questions that a person can check in with their mentor and say, how should I be scheduling this part of my life? Another good example is, sometimes one has relationship things that they need guidance on, whether it's with a spouse or with parents or with siblings or with children. And we think, that I can just figure this out myself. But really, we are somewhat clouded in how we view the situation, because we're thinking from our own paradigm. We're thinking from our own perspective. But when we take a moment to speak it out, speak it over with someone else, we get a chance to see the world through somebody else's glasses. And by seeing the world through someone else's view, we have this new vision of what's going on. And so, my friends, I wish you all the strength to find a person in your lives who you can use as your sounding board. And if you've already got such a person, I wish you the strength and the humility to continue asking that person for their direction and for their instruction.
Can I ask a question?